Hi everyone and greetings from Northern Michigan. This is Bob the Science Guy and welcome to another episode of my series with Dr. Dan Wilson, a practicing molecular biologist out on the East Coast. And today we're going to talk about a few more of our disinformation dozen. We've got about 4 left to go. And hopefully we're going to try and get a couple of those done today, Dan. It's been fun chatting with you, but I'm sure you've got things to do, and so do I. And don't want to take up too much of your time. You've been extremely generous. How are you doing today?
Well, I'm doing well, Bob, thanks. And this has been fun. So we'll see how many we can get through now. We'll be finishing up this series soon, but I'm sure there'll be more stuff for us later.
Oh, you betcha. We've got the anti-vax playbook that we may talk about sometime in the future, and then there's actually a sequel to the disinformation dozen.
hmm
So we've got plenty of stuff to talk about. Well, who would you like to speak about first?
So I think today we can start with good old Sherri Tenpenny.
Sherri Tenpenny. So here we have Dr. Sherri Tenpenny, who is a fellow physician that seems to have used her medical credentials in order to gain quite a bit of profit from the pandemic. You see that her revenues are over $2 million. She's received $72,500 in pandemic payroll protection loans for her 13 employees. Her salary, unfortunately, is not listed, although I'm sure she's not doing this for free. So, Dan, what are your thoughts on Dr. Sherri Tenpenny? You've done some work with her in the past as far as doing some videos. Why don't you go ahead and kind of take the lead on this and tell us about Sherri?
Yeah, so Sherri, she's kind of like the auntie of the anti-vaccine community. um,
The
she
maternal figure.
Yeah, she's been around for a while. And I did one video on her since she's part of the Disinformation Dozen, and I think I did one video on her prior to doing that as well. Um, yeah, she makes a lot of money doing what she does, and one of the things it lists here that I've talked about before is that she runs this boot camp for anti-vaccine activism, where she says that she's going to build an army of essentially anti-vaxxers. And the tickets for these boot camps, they cost over $500. And from what I know about the boot camp, it's about a 8-week course, I think. They meet
Mm-hmm.
maybe once or a couple times a week, and that's it. She makes hundreds of thousands of dollars off of each course that she does, each boot camp that she holds. And she's done it several times. So she is living quite comfortably off of the disinformation that she is spreading. These boot camps, there has been reporting on these boot camps. So if you want to know exactly what she talks about in them, reporters have kind of infiltrated them before and talked about what she does. But one thing that she made it into the news for most recently, and by recently I mean in 2022, I believe, she made the news for claiming that COVID vaccines were making you magnetic.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Well, having looked through the vaccine playbook, one of the things that they really like to promote as a means of expanding the anti-vax movement is that they have these information sites where people with questions can go to get information. And they are met at these information sites by trained propagandists that have the sole purpose of trying to convert the vaccine hesitant to the anti-vax.
Mm.
And that is a very effective technique. It's used by a number of things. I was talking to a friend of mine last night that's in psychology, and the first thing that came to his mind when I talked to him about this and our talk today was Scientology. And it's kind of it's kind of a way to recruit members to your group, and that is that you get them in an environment where they're invested. Specifically, they've had to pay some money to be here, so they've got motivation to pay attention to the message that's being given, and they are just presented with subtle propaganda, and sometimes even not so subtle propaganda, designed to mold their way of thinking. Is that something that you have a little bit of a takeaway from with this as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think they do have a similar playbook, right? Um, Call it a cult, if you will. They've learned from the cults because it apparently works,
Yeah.
and they're able to recruit followers who will pay them to be their leader, essentially. Um, so I think it's fair to say that Sherri Tenpenny is taking a page out of the cult leader playbook.
Yeah. There's a very interesting series of books that I'm researching right now for a future series, and it's going to be over on my main channel, where I'm going to look at mass movements, and I'm going to be doing a lot of research on that. For example, we're going to look at the anti-vax playbook. We're going to look at the tobacco script. We're going to look at How to Talk to a Science Denier by Dr. Lee McIntyre.
Mm.
And the last one is probably one that, you may be familiar with, you may not be. It's kind of something that I was exposed to early on in college. And that is The True Believers by Eric Hoffer.
Mm.
And what he does is he looks at the rise of National Socialism, the rise of Bolshevism, and the rise of religion, to see how they used common techniques. And one of the common techniques is these boot camps. The Nazis did it with their Hitler Youth program. The Bolsheviks did it with Young Pioneers eventually. And what this is just basically kind of along that line where people are being brought in and indoctrinated. So, that's just a thought that I had that I wanted to share with you and let the viewers know one of the things that's coming up in the near future.
Mm.
All right, so let's go into some of the specific claims that Sherri is making. You said something about people becoming magnetic as a result of the
Yeah,
COVID vaccination. Tell me a little bit more about that.
yeah. So that was the last time she made it into the news cycle. Um, she stood up at a public hearing, public event, and made that claim that COVID vaccines are making people magnetic. So that right there should tell you just how far on the spectrum she is when it comes to wackiness and anti-vaccine rhetoric. She is basically putting forth this idea that COVID vaccines, are injecting um, graphene or some other metal material, maybe a microchip, into your arm that is going to make you magnetic. And
Cool.
she, it sounds like a cool superpower, but
Well, would that make me attractive?
oh, you already are. So so yeah, you don't need that, but it unfortunately will not make you into Magneto. Um, but it really, she references these videos that people had where people were sticking things to their arms after apparently getting a COVID vaccine, and little metal objects would stick. And
Do you know
that's
how that
just,
works?
it's an old magic trick. It's
Yeah.
a really old magic trick where if you're just a little damp, so if you put a little water on your skin, or you're extra sweaty, you can get an object to just stick to you.
All right. So, Dan, as you say, it's a magic trick,
Mhm.
and it's something that anybody can do. For example, here's a U.S. nickel. All I have to do, put a little water on it. Apparently, I'm magnetic.
Or you got vaccinated in your forehead or something.
Well, it's a big target for a vaccine, but you never know. So, I wonder how long that'll stay up there.
Oh, let's see.
Well, let's find out. All right. So, Sherri's claiming that people are magnetic.
Yeah, and it really is just as simple as that. There's a great video from the amazing James Randi, a
Mm-hmm.
magician who recently passed away, unfortunately, who was a very big skeptic, very huge in the skeptic community.
Yep.
And he has a video where there was a guy claiming to be magnetic, and he would stick very large metal objects onto his chest and be on stage, wowing audiences with that.
Mm-hmm.
And James Randi said, "Well, if you're truly magnetic, then it shouldn't matter if I sprinkle some powder on your chest, some baby powder,
Yeah.
you know?" And that powder just soaks up all the water, makes him dry, and what do you know? He couldn't do it anymore. So, not
Well,
magnetic.
I wonder if this nickel's staying up there this long because I've got 4 vaccinations, including all the boosters. I wonder if that might have something to do with it. Now, the other thing that Sherri Tenpenny likes to talk about is something that you see a lot in the anti-vax community, and that is the concept of the scamdemic.
Hmm.
Um, is COVID a real disease?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of think it is. Having friends that work in the intensive care unit of Sparrow Hospital, which is one of our major hospitals in Lansing, Michigan, um, they had quite a bit of issues with the number of patients that came in. I mean, the nurses were literally working themselves to exhaustion.
Hmm. Oh yeah, over at CHOP, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. I mean, it's a children's hospital, and they still had cases of COVID where children were intubated as young as less than a year old.
Yeah.
So it's definitely real.
One thing that I probably should mention about intubation as somebody who has been intubating people since I was 20 years old,
Mm.
um, we don't do that for fun. All right. Intubation is a skilled procedure. Um, it is a dangerous procedure. You have to have a lot of training in order to do it. And once you put somebody on a ventilator, sometimes it's rather difficult to get them off. It's tough having a serious conversation with a molecular biologist while I have a nickel stuck to my forehead. But we'll soldier through it. And once you have somebody on a ventilator, one of the very first things that you want to do when you wake up every morning is, can I get Mrs. Smith off of the ventilator today?
Mm.
You go in and you talk to the nurse, how'd she do overnight, what's your feeling on it? Because believe it or not, um, the opinion of the nurse as to whether or not a patient can get off the vent is actually one of the best indications that a patient can or can't get off a vent. So every day we give them a little trial and see whether or not maybe they can, fly on their own. And when they don't succeed, you have to do it again the next day. And you try and get them off, because if you don't get them off within about 2 weeks, you end up having to trach them. You know they you can't keep somebody on a ventilator with an endotracheal tube
Mm.
for more than about 2 weeks, or else you start ending up with tissue necrosis in their larynx, and that's ugly stuff. All right, so let's see what else we have. She has described the COVID vaccination as genocidal.
Oh,
That it alters DNA, that it impairs fertility. I think you did something about a study about fertility and COVID, didn't you? Didn't you see
yeah.
something about that? Tell me a little bit about that. Does the COVID vaccination cause infertility?
No, it does not. No, it's been very well studied. Um, I'll have a video on my channel coming out about this very topic, going in depth with an immunologist in who works in topics of pregnancy and women's health within the next month, hopefully. But the point of that video will be explaining the data on how we know that COVID vaccines are very safe for pregnant women. And in fact, pregnant women are one of the groups of people who should definitely get vaccinated against COVID, because pregnant women in general are extra vulnerable
Mm-hmm.
to respiratory diseases. It's always been that way.
Well,
If
one of the complications of pregnancy is fluid overload,
hmm
and it's very hard on women to carry babies. Their physiology completely changes, and they do become susceptible to these things. Some women even develop things like gestational diabetes. It brings
hmm
out things that may or may not develop later on in life during the pregnancy. Now, one other thing that I wanted to talk with you about, I think one of the things that we've already discussed is that COVID, of course, doesn't change your DNA. It has absolutely nothing to do with DNA.
Right.
It sets up a messenger RNA that causes your cells to build a protein based on a prescription or recipe that is
Hmm.
provided in the COVID vaccination. One other thing that she talks about is the idea that COVID vaccinations cause dementia. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know how she would have figured that out, seeing as dementia is something that develops over a long period of time, and
Mm-hmm.
COVID vaccines have not been out for that long. And there's also no conceivable mechanism I can think of that would make a vaccine cause dementia.
Yeah. You know what does cause dementia? COVID.
Mm, yeah.
One of the things that you run into with COVID infection, and this is something that I noticed with myself, as you know, I had COVID last fall.
Hmm.
And one thing that I noticed when I had that was that as I was recovering it for the next month or two, um, I honestly thought that my thought process was impaired a little bit.
Mm.
I felt like I had like a brain fog going.
Yeah, brain fog is has been reported pretty commonly with cases of COVID, and worse for severe COVID. Some people have brain fog for months after
Yeah.
a bad case.
Now I recovered from it, obviously, but
Mm,
the only thing that I can compare it to is when I was younger, I had a concussion. I had a closed head injury.
mm,
And to the point that I was unconscious as a result of a blow to the head. And for a couple of weeks to a couple of months after that, it I had that same type of a brain fog, and that's the only thing that I can compare the brain fog of COVID to was that
mm.
concussion. So let's see what else we have. She's also a big campaigner against masks and lockdowns, I see.
Yeah. Um,
Is that unique to her? Or is that just part of her overall attempt to market the group?
oh, I mean, you kind of have to be anti-lockdown and anti-mask if you're part of the disinformation dozen.
Yeah. And again, is that because they're so interested in personal freedom? Or is it because a lot of people are upset about masks and mask mandates and lockdowns, and they're trying to play on that? Recall what we saw with Del Bigtree
Hmm.
at the January 6th rally, the anti-vaccine rally that he had concurrently with the rally and subsequent insurrection that they had in Washington, where he was literally playing on the audience. I wish I could believe that vaccines were safe. I wish I could believe the CDC. I wish I could believe
Mm.
that the election was fair. But I can't believe any of those things. And that really resonated with the crowd that was in
Hmm.
Washington that day.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a strategy for Tenpenny and a lot of the members of this disinformation dozen to take advantage of the fact that so many issues surrounding COVID have been politicized. And so there's a large political base that they could appeal to. And having that title of doctor makes them seem that much more credible to people. So when they have a doctor like Tenpenny reaffirming their political beliefs and weaving in this anti-lockdown, anti-mask, anti-vaccine messaging, it makes it really easy for her to just spew scientific nonsense, have them believe it, and she gains followers.
According to Hoffer, and again, he literally studied the rise of some mass movements. In the 1920s and the early 1930s, if German society was completely thrown into upheaval after the war. There was new poverty. There was social dissatisfaction with the future. It's akin in a way to the way that lockdowns and masks presented an upheaval here in our society. And in Germany, you know, if you were a young man that was unemployed and looking for some sort of a future, you know, your choice was to either join the Nazis or join the communists. And Hitler actually said that his best recruitment tool was to get the communists. He didn't fear them as rivals. What he did was he looked at them as people that had already demonstrated that they were predisposed to joining a radical group. And as a result, he thought that his best chance would be to recruit these people into his group because they're already radicalized. You just have to redirect them a little bit. And I think that's one of the things that Del Bigtree was trying to do. He was trying to take the people in the Capitol that were there to protest the election and just kind of make them sidestep a little bit to join his group by saying, hey, we have a common enemy.
It almost makes you think these people are smart in a way.
Oh, what, the disinformation doesn't? Yes.
Yeah.
They're excellent propagandists. You know, Del Bigtree, of course, is a marketing man. But a lot of these other people stand to gain so much by recruiting members to their fold. And they make a lot of money off of it. And using a simple parlor trick like this is a great way to do it. Because if you sit down and stick a dime to your arm where you had your vaccination and it sticks, all of a sudden, well, maybe what they're talking about means something. Right. Now you can testify. I haven't taken this thing off the entire time, and you know, and this is a continuous recording for you and I, and I've not moved that thing.
Right. It's there. It's been in the same spot.
Yep.
I'm surprised it hasn't fallen off yet. Actually, you've been shaking your head around.
It works. That's the problem. If you know how to do it. You know, the other thing that we used to see was Rob Skiba in the Flat Earth movement used to do what's called Skiba lensing, using a Fresnel lens to make objects disappear, make the city the city skyline disappear by moving the camera. And that's a simple power trick just like this. I did a video once showing how that works. You know, one of the fun things that I do in Flat Earth is I like to catch them while they're trying to manipulate things and play little tricks like this. And, you know, those are some of my favorite videos to do. You know, Phuket Word with, you know, throwing the lighter out, you know, making the lighter disappear, and, Skiba with his Skiba lensing. And now Sherri Tenpenny with her magnetic vaccinations.
Oh, sorry. I think maybe something to add to the magnetic thing. Could talk about like how we know that the contents of the vaccines are not magnetic and there's no graphene in them and stuff. Okay,
well, you said something about graphene in the vaccine somehow making them magnetic. Do you have any further thoughts on that?
Yeah. So that's been a bad idea that comes up every now and then in the anti-vaccine community, that COVID vaccines somehow have graphene in them, and that might be what makes you magnetic in Tenpenny's case. But it's really easy to understand why that's not true. There are several chemical engineering reasons that a chemical engineer could point out about the vaccines to say that's not true. But I'll just talk about something called good manufacturing practices. Have you heard about that, Bob?
No.
It's a practice or a law in pharma where if you're making a pharmaceutical product, you have to follow GMP, good manufacturing practices. And that means that you have to document and test and report the results of every single ingredient in a biological product or a drug product, including vaccines. So, and you have to report that to the FDA, and they review. That's the kind of data that they review for each lot of medicine that goes out. So you have to demonstrate what your product is, what's in it, how much of it is there, whether it's within acceptable ranges, all that stuff. And graphene is definitely not on the list of ingredients for
So
COVID vaccine.
there's not a secret sauce in vaccines, is what you're saying. There's no 11 herbs and spices,
Mm-mm.
or a formula kept in a vault in Atlanta. What's in the vaccine is well known and
Nope. Yeah,
easy to
it's not a
demonstrate.
yeah, it's not a Krabby Patty secret formula. You can look it up online and see exactly the ingredients of a vaccine.
All right. Now, the other thing that, we talked a little bit about Dell and the folks on January 6th. Sherri Tenpenny has gotten involved with Mike Lydell,
Mm.
the My Pillow guy, and
Hmm.
other people in the in the MAGA movement, in the conspiratorial election denial movements. Um, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think kind of speaks to what you were talking about, where she's tapping into this politicization. She's tapping into this group of people who are willing to join a radical group. So election denial is a radical group, and they'll readily believe other radical things like vaccines kill you and vaccines have all these nasty ingredients in them and they make you magnetic.
Infertility and magnetism
Fertility, yeah,
and
all
dementia
that,
and all sorts of things.
all that nonsense. It's a group ready to believe that stuff. And she is a businesswoman running a misinformation business. So
Multi-million dollar disinformation business.
mhm, she is a millionaire for sure.
Now,
And yeah.
when you look at Lee McIntyre and his 5 tropes or characteristics of science denial,
Hmm.
the first one, of course, is cherry picking. The second one is belief in conspiracy theories.
Hmm.
And then the other ones would be promotion of fake experts over real experts, poor or poor scientific reasoning, and an inappropriate expectation of perfection from science. And if you look at a lot of these, if you look at the flat Earth, or if you look at anti-vax social media posts, you'll see these same characteristics.
Hmm.
And I think that that's sometimes those experts are just misinformed. Those fake experts are just misinformed, or they're exhibiting other characteristics of science denial. And some, I think, deliberately go out of their way, like Sherri Tenpenny, to misinform people using their credentials to do so. And again, if you believe in one conspiracy, the belief in the second conspiracy is a lot easier. So there was a pediatrics group in Philadelphia, I believe it was, that put a notice out on their Facebook page. Hey, school year's starting up. Make sure your kids have your vaccinations. We're open, for vaccinations.
Hmm.
And they just got bombarded by anti-vaxxers. And rather than upset them, what they did was they said, well, let's do a study. So what they did was they went back to all of the anti-vaxxer posters, the anti-vax posters, and they looked at their Facebook profiles. And they found certain characteristics in them. One is a belief in multiple conspiracy theories. The other is the promotion of quote unquote natural healing and natural medicine over man made medicine, whatever that is. Then you had a group of people that really just didn't know what to think but wanted to find out some more information. And as a result, people like Tenpenny will set up these informational seminars designed to catch those folks. And then you ran into people that were just contrarians and, quite frankly, were doing it just to be assholes.
Hmm.
And I found that very interesting. And I think that there's a big difference between being vaccine hesitant and being anti-vax.
Oh, for
Uh,
sure.
as a matter of fact, one of the findings of this study was that people that were vaccine hesitant tended to actually know more about vaccines than people that would just go in and say, okay, well, my doctor's recommending this, we're going to go ahead and do it. And that is because they trust the opinion of the doctor who's specifically trained in this sort of stuff. But they knew more facts about vaccines, like ingredient lists and things like that. They just didn't know what to do with those facts, and they couldn't make the connections.
Hmm. Right.
primarily because they simply didn't have the training to understand it. It's we can read studies in fields that we're not trained in.
Hmm.
We can read the study, but we don't necessarily have the tools to understand what the study shows.
Hmm.
And that's a common thing that I see a lot in these people that do their own research. They can read the material, but they don't really understand what it says. For example, in Flat Earth, this pen, okay? If this pen falls to the ground by weight, the Earth is spherical.
Hmm.
Earth is a sphere. There's really no other, if you understand the implications of the fact that this pen falls down,
Hmm.
you know that the Earth is a sphere.
Yeah.
But if your goal is to believe the Earth is flat or vaccines are harmful, you're not going to make that connection.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. And it's actually, it is interesting that people who are vaccine hesitant tend to know more about vaccines. Um, but I think that speaks to two things happening is one, people who are susceptible to conspiratorial thinking generally are curious. They
Mm-hmm.
do they do get pleasure out of learning. They want to learn things, but the things they learn end up being kind of a very selected script. And that's the other thing I think is happening here. I think it would be kind of like an anti-vaxxer is given a script of just one character from a TV show. They might be able to quote more lines from that TV show from someone who has maybe seen a commercial about it or knows about the show, but that doesn't mean they really know the plot or they can make any connections about the story.
That's a very good analogy. It's an incomplete, it's a thorough but incomplete bit of information that does not enable you to see the big picture.
Right.
You may learn that, for example, that there are episodes of myocarditis associated with vaccines. True fact. All right.
Mm-hmm.
However, you don't make the connection that myocarditis is generally associated with viral illnesses, and the chance of getting myocarditis from COVID is far, far greater than the chance of getting myocarditis from a COVID vaccination.
Right.
All right. So I think maybe one of the things that we can do as professionals in this field and true experts is maybe we can help them connect the dots a little bit better, or at
Yeah.
least give them some guidance so that they can learn to do that themselves. So,
Mm-hmm.
do we have anything more to say about Miss Sherri?
I don't think so. I think she is a very straightforward character. Her motivations are clear. What she says is completely crazy, and
Mm-hmm.
that's her in a nutshell.
Yep. But she's smart enough to understand this. Okay.
Yep. She is definitely smart enough to understand that what she is saying is wrong, but she says it anyway.
Yes, and she's smart enough to understand that there are certain tricks that she can employ that will encourage people to view her as a true expert
Hmm.
and take what she says to heart. Now, just so you know, that's not glued there. Okay. I
Yeah.
almost considered wearing that through the next two or three episodes just to see whether or not it will stay. But
Probably would have.
it probably would have. And I mean, there's no glue on this. I can do it with either side.
Yep.
All right. And my forehead's not even all, I'm not certainly not sweaty up there. You can see I don't have any shine or anything.
Hmm.
But it just, it's a parlor trick.
Hmm.
And it's disgusting that somebody is using a parlor trick to put people's lives at risk.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Wilson. Let's go ahead and cut this one down. I think we've got a couple of more to do. So this is Bob the Science Guy signing out from Northern Michigan. Take a moment, swing by and see Dr. Wilson debunk the funk on his YouTube channel. There's a link to it in the description. Drop him a sub and check out some of his material. I think he really is he really puts a lot of very complex subjects into an easily digestible and understanding format. I've learned a lot from watching his videos. I think you will too. Thank you again, Dan.
Thank you, Bob.
Mama, please make them hear me, or I can't teach them anymore. This rabbit hole's too deep for me. Feel my brain getting real sore. Bob, the science guy. Bob, the science guy.